So we're going to look at, through Genesis here, we're going to continue in Bereshit in Genesis, and we're going to see covenants and how they work and interact with the idea of promises that are being made. Because, see, we have a lot of people out there, and we started with this from people refer to themselves as saved or believers or whatever. They have these statuses, these titles they want to put on themselves. Well, I think the only title we need to really worry about is, are you covenanted? All right? Because a lot of people say they're believers, but they're not covenanted. So now, when we get to remember when we got to verse 9, it says, see, I established my covenant. It'd be easy for us, and I already did that for you just because I played into what you would normally think, that the stuff beforehand was the covenant. That Noahic covenant talking about the blood and everything. No, he was just giving them guidance and instruction. The covenant is about what in this case? But by the way, is that covenant still valid today? Yes. Does that covenant have anything to do with the covenant made at Mount Sinai in Exodus 19? No. So we can have more than one covenant, but we're not looking at it in Christianese eyes. Well, there's the old covenant, which was done away with, and now the new covenant. Well, guess what? There's lots of covenants. Some of them have to do with things like flooding the earth, which we just read about. Others have to do with expectations and our behavior towards each other and towards our Creator. Abram was concerned. He said, how do I know that I will possess this? You keep telling me I'm going to possess it. And by the way, at this point, I can understand where Abram's at, so maybe you can as well, because after all, he has not yet possessed it, and other people own it. Other people were dwelling on it. It's like, imagine I drove you by a piece of property with houses on it and stuff, and I kept telling you every few years, by the way, that's going to be yours and your seeds. And yet you still don't have it. And years later, you still don't have it, and years later, you still don't have it. And Abram's like, yeah, I keep hearing you say this, but how do I know? What does that mean? See, why was David a man after Yahweh's own heart? The man had integrity. When he messed up, he owned it. Didn't push it off on anybody, didn't excuse it. He said, yep, I did that. I messed up, and I'm sorry, and I repent. And he did all the right processes. Have integrity. He says, walk before me. So in other words, the things that you do on a daily basis, the halacha, we call it halacha. The word there would be a form of the word holech, or walk. So he says, look, I'm going to establish my covenant between me and you and your seed after you and their generations for an everlasting covenant to be Elohim to you and your seed. But there is something that determines whether or not you are, well, you don't need anything to determine whether or not you're Abraham. There was one, and it was him, and that's it. But what do you need to figure out? What it means to be his seed. And that's what Paul's trying to explain in Galatians, what identifies you as seed of Abraham. Does it mean that you go over to Ancestry.com and figure out if you have his DNA? Well, that wasn't available to most people until recently. And even then, they couldn't tell you if you're Abraham's seed. How do you know? Stop arguing about this. There's only one valid excuse, and this has come up in our discussions before, for not getting circumcised if you want to be covenanted. You don't want to be covenanted, you don't have to do anything. The covenant has an expectation of performance, do's and don'ts. He's saying this is a sign of a covenant, which, by the way, he said this covenant is between who? Abraham and his seed forever. This is not just a between him and Abraham thing. This is between him and all the generations forward. So he says, well, let Ishmael live before you, because Ishmael he had with him. And Elohim said, no. Wait a minute, let's start off with Elohim said no. Sometimes Elohim says no. That's hard for some people. And here he says, no, Sarah, your wife, is truly bearing a son to you, and you shall call his name Yitzchak, and I shall establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seeds after him. So he's saying, look, I'm going to transfer all this stuff to Yitzchak. And notice he tells him already what you're going to call your kid. Call him Laughter, because you laughed. And in your seed, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. Wait, hold on a second. He made a covenant unilaterally earlier. So why is he saying now? It's because you obeyed my voice. Well, can we all go to that their Father and when we're dealing with Yahweh, that he knows the end from the beginning? That time is irrelevant. He sees all things at all times as being the same. Do you think maybe when he made the covenant and promise, he knew Abraham would do this? That's why he picked Abraham, because he already knew the choices he would make. But now we're seeing why this is a good question. Until this moment, why would he give all of this great stuff to Abraham? What made Abraham so great? Why did he pick this guy?